Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the TIBCO Labs for Developers Forum. Today, we have a very exciting topic. We're going to be covering what is after serverless, and I am joined by two experts in that topic, Nelson Petracek, Global CTO at TIBCO Software, and Leon Stichter, Principal Product Manager at Lightbend. I know we have people from pretty much all over the world. I was seeing the countries mentioned in the welcome: France, Peru, Nairobi, Canada, Mexico, India, Georgia, Florida, California here in the US. So this is very exciting to have people from all over joining us for this exciting conversation today. Leon, Nelson, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. And same as other times, we're going to try to keep these as interactive as possible. So for folks in the audience, if you have any questions, please just start typing them, send them over, and we're going to try to incorporate all the questions as we go through the conversation here today. So all right, let's get us started. So Leon, I for folks that they don't know you, or you are an expert in this topic, so maybe we can start by just leveling set with everybody and just simply explaining, what's serverless. It's a term that we hear it, over and over, right? And people use it obviously in different contexts, with different purposes, right? But maybe we can start there and start building from there. Today.
Yeah, so first off, I think that's a great question, and you're absolutely spot on that serverless, or the word serverless, is used in a bunch of different contexts. And I think that, and this might actually be true for most people on that are listening to us right now, for a lot of people, serverless is sort of equivalent to function as a service. And I mean, for good reason, because arguably the whole serverless idea really started when AWS came out with AWS Lambda. I mean, sure, there were a few things before that, but not always as successful. So I'm willing to bet the vast majority of people on the call knew about serverless or knows about serverless because of AWS Lambda. But if you look at what it actually means, there is just so much more that you can do with it. Like if you look at what, generally speaking, serverless means, it obviously means that there are no servers to provision or manage. And I absolutely get that there are servers in serverless. It's just that, overall, you don't have to manage all of those. It's scaling your application as more usage comes, but also as you get less usage. So it really is scaling from 0 to infinity and back again. And then I think one of the most important tenets is paying for value. So if I pay for something, I want it to be for something that's actually valuable to me. Like if I take a function as an example, I only want to pay for it when it's actually running, when it is consuming CPU, when it's consuming memory. When I think about databases, I only want to pay for it when I'm actually storing some data. And then last, but certainly not least, really important to us is availability and fault tolerance built in. Because the worst thing that can happen is if you don't manage your servers and if you pay for the value that you get, then you want to be sure that all of that value, all of that business logic that you build, that's going to be available whenever you need it, wherever you need it, and it's not going to fail over or fall over at some point.
Yeah. So I think it's just fair to say that serverless is something that has changed from the way we develop software, develop applications, to the way we consume applications, the ways providers support their customers and their users as they use those applications. Right? So it has basically impact pretty much everything in the life cycle of software. Right. So Nelson, from an enterprise point of view, what does that mean for customers of, let's say, TIBCO, but just customers in general, right? Organizations that they are trying to get started in serverless and trying to incorporate different models from different vendors, right? That they have to use, right, in their implementations.
Yeah, I mean, I think you alluded to it just in introducing the question. I mean, the ways in which organizations have to adapt and adjust in terms of how they build applications, systems, services, functions, as Leon mentioned. That's usually how it's equated, functions with serverless architectures. But the way in which you approach application development does change, because now in many ways, and there's going to be different aspects to this, but first of all, you're not dealing with infrastructure anymore. And that's kind of the whole point. You're dealing with a set of capabilities where now you're focused on the logic, your code, whatever the building blocks of your services are going to be, and then you're focused on that aspect of it and deploying that in a different context than what you might have been previously. So you don't have to worry now about what the infrastructure is, what the hardware is, how you're only going to get charged for when it's actually running. These are all considerations now that really open a lot of doors to you in terms of how you can build and deploy applications. Although, there's the flip side of this where it brings a number of new considerations. So I've seen cases where people, and again, I'll kind of introduce or use functions as an example here, because that's typically how people think about serverless, as Leon mentioned again. But I've seen organizations say, "Oh, this is just a free for all. I can just deploy and build all these functions and deploy them anywhere, and I don't need to worry about anything." And I mean, eventually, at some point, you're going to run into issues. Just because it's serverless doesn't mean it's painless. And so you will run into circumstances where people maybe went too far in one direction. Serverless isn't, and the associated development approaches are not necessarily the answer for all use cases, but it certainly brings a lot of speed, agility, time to market, and all those capabilities. It really enables you to deploy these different applications sooner, faster, better. So it's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of approaching application development. It's a different way of deploying these applications, management, monitoring, those kinds of things, and also a different way of orchestrating these functions as well. So a lot of considerations here when it comes to application development with serverless.
Excellent. Yeah, Leon, there's a question coming from the audience that introduces two terms that they usually go side by side with serverless, right? Like platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, right? So the question from Shriramulu from Wipro Technologies is AWS or any platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, I guess offering, right, serverless by default?
So no, I would say it isn't by default. And so also, I think it's a great question. And just because the question is more AWS related, let me pick one specific AWS service and sort of break down those four tenets that I talked about, and I'll explain why it isn't necessarily by default serverless. So let's think about AWS's EC2. The VMs that you can spin up, and very much to Nelson's point, every one of those compute, and this. I'm not now talking about compute, but this goes for pretty much everything else. All of them have their own pros, their own cons. So talking about EC2, do I need to provision or manage servers in the case of EC2? Well, yes. So it already breaks down on that first tenet, because I'm responsible for managing the operating system that runs on that VM. Is it going to be able to automatically scale with usage? Well, yeah. I mean, they have auto scaling groups in AWS, so I'd say yeah, that works. Paying for value is the one where it again sort of breaks down, because I'm paying for the entire VM, even if I don't use it. Even if I use like half of it or even less, I'm paying for all of it. So that's sort of where that breaks down. And the availability and fault tolerance, I mean, I'd almost say that with something like AWS, it's very hard not to get that. So yeah. That's why, again, all of those components have their role to play, but not everything by default that you use from a cloud provider is going to be serverless.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Great clarification. That's actually, by the way, a question that comes up, I think every single time, right? Whether it's by default any cloud service serverless or not, right? And you mentioned AWS, but another interesting question from the audience, from Pradeep, working with Cognizant Technology. The question is if they have like serverless functions in Azure, right? Like we've been talking about like AWS, right? But like what about like Azure? What about like GCP, right? Like other platforms out there. So is it the same as we're talking about? I mean, is something transferable? I mean, the concept is transferable from or cloud agnostic or cloud platform agnostic, if you will?
The ideas, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we've been talking about AWS, but I could replace AWS Lambda with Azure Functions or Google Cloud Functions. I could have done instead of AWS EC2, I could have done Google Cloud Compute Engine, or the equivalents in Azure. So there is definitely, the idea is pretty widespread among pretty much all of the cloud providers that at least I know of, both private cloud as well as public cloud. The code itself, on the other hand, is obviously not as portable, because you do a few specific things for each of those providers, and that kind of makes sense because you want to write the least amount of code. I mean, that's one of the ideas behind serverless. So if I want to reduce the amount of code, I need some extra abstraction, and that abstraction can only be done by a cloud provider that integrates everything for me. So are the ideas transferable? Absolutely. The code, not so much.
Okay, excellent. So Nelson, to clarify here, another very common question, right? So we talk about, how you can have a platform as a service sell, right, or offering, right? You can run that offering as in a serverless fashion, right? So for something like TIBCO Cloud, for example, right? I mean, where does the line ends or begins, right? In terms of when you talk about like ISVs in general, and they have like cloud-based offerings, are those cloud-based offerings considered serverless by default or not? Or is it the same distinction that we're making here with AWS and Microsoft, where it really depends on the way you manage that infrastructure?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same considerations are going to apply here. I mean, what you will find, I think, is a lot of organizations that are providing some sort of cloud platform, whether it's some software as a service capabilities that you're providing, platform as a service capabilities that you're providing, whatever that might be. A lot of those organizations underneath the covers are using serverless technologies. And it's for the reasons that we've been talking about. Leon, very, very eloquently described the 4 criteria, if you will, that you can use to judge as to whether or not something is considered to be serverless. And when you apply that criteria to the development of a platform, or even to the development of a SaaS kind of style of application, serverless can also bring you a number of different benefits, even if the platform itself isn't necessarily considered as serverless, again, according to those criteria. So, the platform itself, though, can leverage those capabilities underneath the covers. So, for example, if somebody builds some capability using your platform tools and clicks the magic deploy button, underneath the covers, that may actually be using something like AWS Lambda, Azure Functions, these kinds of things under the covers in order to actually execute whatever it is that you built. Now, from an end user standpoint, it may not be considered true serverless. Maybe it's because of the pricing model. Maybe it's because of some of the other ways and some of the other dependencies that you've introduced as part of that. But underneath the covers, different aspects of the platform can be implemented as serverless. Brings reduced costs to the platform provider or the SaaS provider, makes it easier and much more agile to scale, makes it easier to deploy new capabilities, all these kinds of benefits that organizations would see if they use Lambda directly. You see the same things if you incorporate those into an underlying platform.
Okay. So I guess, as we talk more about like the different, angles, right, of the serverless concept, serverless is a very horizontal concept in just by default, right? But when you talk about like, subject areas, and this is a question for both of you really, but, are some subject areas more prone to leverage serverless than others, right? Like, so for example, everybody talks about analytics today, right? Like in machine learning and AI, and but there's dozens and dozens of these subject areas, right? So are all of them the same position to leverage serverless, or some of them they can benefit more than others? Or what's your take on that?
Do you want to start, Nelson, or shall I?
Either way. I mean, I think, when you look at, I'll make an initial comment and I'll let you fill in all the blanks. How about that? We'll go with that. That's right. I think that if you're looking at it from a use case or even a vertical standpoint, which is kind of sort of what you're alluding to, I would suggest that regardless of the vertical that you're in, you have an opportunity to leverage serverless. I think a lot of it will be driven by the characteristics of the what tends to be an application that you're refactoring, or even a new capability that you're building. But in many cases, organizations that are looking to refactor existing capabilities and move those to the cloud, parts of those applications can then be broken down and incorporated or built as serverless, but not necessarily all of it. But I think that comment would apply regardless of vertical. So if you're in finance, if you're in healthcare, if you're in transportation and logistics, the same benefits are going to apply. It's really going to be primarily use case driven, how mature you are in your cloud journey, what types of applications you're looking to build, whether it's a shift of legacy, whether it's a brand new application. All those are going to be factors that come into play. But I can't point to one vertical and say, oh yeah, absolutely, they're a perfect match for serverless. This other vertical, now you know what, you're stuck. You go use containers, right? It's not along those lines, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, 100% agree with what you said, Nelson. I'm pretty sure that every vertical that you looked at, you can find use cases where serverless makes a lot of sense. And you'll find a lot of use cases where serverless doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. I mean, we still have mainframes running, the technology that we said decades ago was going to die out. We still have that, and it still plays a vital part in at least part of our financial infrastructure. So that's why I think you're always going to find use cases that are great for serverless. You're always going to find use cases where you're like, either the business benefits aren't there, or it's just going to be too hard, too costly, too time consuming to go refactor all of that. Because that's one of the things you said, I think almost deserves like a special call out. When you're moving into the cloud, or even when you're building something new in the cloud, you always have to ask yourself, is doing it serverless going to be worth it? Because if you're refactoring, it is going to take time away from you building something else. And that's where I think one of the quotes that has always stuck with me from Werner Vogels, the CTO at AWS, he said about serverless that you actually want to leverage managed services as much as possible and focus your engineering resources on adding the business logic and moving the needle for your business, for your customers. And I think that is the one thing that everyone should always be thinking about. How do I move the needle for my customer?
Yeah, and Jesus, it was interesting. You mentioned AI ML models. Could they be exposed via a serverless capability? Yes. But in certain cases, that's not necessarily what you want. And a lot of it just comes down to the level of control that you need in some cases. In some cases, you want to know that this is going to be running on GPU optimized underlying infrastructure. And some serverless capabilities won't give you that level of flexibility, which in some ways is the point. But in other ways, if you're building systems and applications where you need that degree of control, maybe for performance reasons, could even be things around security. Can you run, for example, a function in a secure enclave? Cloud environments put some security around that, but not to that degree. And so, if you need those kinds of very more specialized requirements, serverless may not be the answer for you, and you need, you're going to be managing a little more on your own because of those special needs.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting angle, right? And so as we talk about the I guess the assessment, right, on the technical requirements, and then doing the evaluation whether it's a good fit or not, right, a good approach or not. There's a question from the audience that fits very nicely in here, which is, how do you typically get started with serverless, right? I mean, let's say, there's a new organization or a new company, right, that wants to launch XYZ product, right, in the market, right? And then, they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we go about building infrastructure quickly, right? Like with trying to lowering risk, lowering cost, or lowering initial investment, right? Like how do you get started in this journey, I guess?
Leon, I'll let you start with this one then, since I took the last one.
I appreciate it, Nelson. Thank you. So the way that I would start, and this is literally the way I started when I was still at TIBCO, for that matter, looking at serverless technology, is coming up with a use case. The use case that I had at that time, we just launched Project Flogo, which oh wait, wrong side. I'm still wearing the hoodie because it's awesome. I wanted to know what people were building, so I built like a simple web scraper that would every now and then just collect a bunch of data and send it over to me. And I didn't really want to spin up an EC2. I didn't really want to spin up a Kubernetes cluster. So I started looking at what was around in order to solve my use case, where I didn't have to manage as well, I had to manage as little as possible, so I could focus on the things that actually mattered, getting the data. And I think that is exactly the way that a lot of companies that I've spoken to start with serverless. They come up with a use case and think, darn, I kind of want to make sure that my teams can do things really fast, that we don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time either requesting infrastructure or provisioning it. And we want to focus on things that, you know, are going to help us at the end of the day. And if managing Kubernetes, managing EC2s, if that is your thing, if that gives you that competitive edge, absolutely go for it. If it isn't, then, you know, starting with the idea of doing something with serverless is absolutely great. So, you know, talking about prerequisites, I think about a use case. Think about something small. If you haven't done anything with serverless at all, start with something small. See how it works. Feel like where the rough edges are, because as you said, Nelson, not everyone is going to be mature on day one. I mean, it is going to require you to change a bit about how you think.
Yeah, so, I think that's. Oh, sorry, is this I was going to add? I mean, that's a great point, and I see the same thing. You know, you have to start with that use case and find out what works and what does not work. And that's just as important. You know, certain patterns are just not going to be a fit for serverless, and in many ways, you're going to find that out through experience. And inevitably, what ends up happening is that as you start to target more use cases at serverless and start to define for you as an organization where it fits and where it doesn't, then you start to kind of take a step back and generalize and develop these almost architectural patterns and blueprints that then can be applied across your organization and really help you with that decision around, for these kinds of applications, these kinds of systems, this makes more sense in a serverless environment. This one, maybe not so much, and here's the reasons why. And so architecturally, you start to set some guidelines and some best practices as to how and when you would use it.
So if I hear you correctly, crawl, cautious walk, cautious run, sort of strategy. Okay, got it.
Keep that time frame very, very small. So, you know, it's, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, but Leon, you mentioned something from the operational side. You know, it's almost like very clear cut, right? Like whether, you know, makes sense or not, depending on the scenario, right? But what about like from the actual core development side? Does serverless ends up saving you, you know, development hours? You know, do you need less code or more code with serverless?
So it, as with pretty much everything that we've talked about so far, it depends, but it absolutely can reduce a lot of the code. I mean, especially if you, and I almost hate to say this, but if you go all in on serverless, and I'm just going to use AWS as an example. What I'm going to be talking about applies equally to the other cloud providers as well. But most of the time, what they do is they provide really nice SDKs or like plugins or node modules, depending on what language that you use, that essentially wrap the APIs of those other products that you're talking to. Like if I have to use AWS Lambda with something like SQS or SNS, then the only thing I have to do during my deployment is say, you are now triggered, my Lambda function is triggered by that queue or that topic. I don't have to write any code for it. I don't have to specify like how it's going to get those messages. It does everything for me. So ultimately, I have to write less code, and to me, that's great. I'm a PM, so you know you should never trust me to build stuff that runs in production. So, and I think that is true for a lot of the things. I mean, if you look at something like, again, I'm going to pick on Flogo simply because I've used that. I know that. That's great to build, for example, your Lambda functions or things that connect to something else. And if I can do less writing code, that means that I can test it more. I can test it easier, which is great. But it also means that I spent less time doing it, so I can focus more time on doing other things like incrementally adding value.
Perfect. Yeah. So we have time for 2 more questions, and I think these are probably the most interesting questions. So I kept them for the end here. So the first one is from a use case point of view. I mean, we talk about subject areas, right? But like from just the strictly speaking a use case point of view, just curious. I mean, I know both of you are exposed to a lot of different sort of scenarios, especially at the enterprise level. So what are the most innovative use cases that you've seen when it comes to serverless? And it could be anything, really. I mean, it could be any industry, any scenario. I mean, just to give a flavor to the audience here in terms of what kind of use cases typically are addressed with serverless technologies.
That's a good question. There's so many. I'm trying to have a hard time trying to narrow it down and do it within 2.2 minutes, I'm sure. So I think we've had some interesting use cases around effectively digital twins. So if you think of running or representing entities, real world entities, as a digital representation, and in this particular case, because the stereotypical definition of a digital twin involves equipment. So you create a digital representation of an expensive piece of machinery, and you break the digital representation, not the real one, because that's obviously cheaper. You can also apply the same concept to a person. So in this particular instance, and Leon alluded to this earlier, where serverless can be very event-driven, imagine actually tracking the journey of a particular, I'm going to use just patient as an example, all the events and activities that occur to a patient. And you can imagine then your serverless functions, in this particular case, this is how it was implemented, responding to changes in the condition of that person based upon information that's coming from, let's say, wearables. Mm-hmm. So kind of cool. I mean, you now have a digital representation of a person. You have a series of serverless functions responding to different events from that individual based upon information feeds from wearables. And then you are taking appropriate responses and actions, right, in order to better the care of that individual. So kind of an interesting blend of, first of all, the concept of digital twin to people, which is kind of interesting in itself, and then the use of serverless to actually support the implementation of that, again, to facilitate better care. So interesting in that regard.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally love that. I do think that the more serverless we use, the better it is ultimately, because we can spend time doing other things. Love that use case. So I'm going to pick something that is a bit different. It's also one of the more public case studies that AWS has done, but it has always stuck with me just because of the sheer volume. Because everyone always says that serverless is great, for scale, but what kind of scale are we talking about? And there is this case study about FINRA, which is a nonprofit org that for the US oversees like the security broker dealers. And what they do, they use AWS Lambda, they use serverless to analyze about 75 billion transactions per day. I mean, you obviously cannot stop just to analyze all of that. So it has to happen in real time. And just 75 billion, I mean, that number is ridiculously large. So that to me is a really exciting use case, together with the idea of digital twin, which I absolutely think is a great fit.
Those are great examples. Thank you for that. And so for the closing question, I mean, it's actually the question in the title of this session, which is what is next? So we talk about Leon, at the beginning, you did a really great job at explaining sort of from a timeline point of view, right? How we got from all ways of developing software, right, to serverless and cloud-based delivery, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, right? So when you think of serverless, if you would fast forward, to the next 5 years, I mean, where do you see all this going, right? In terms of, being faster, being more cost efficient, scaling more horizontally, vertically, and what's in your mind?
So I honestly hope, as as a maybe a bit as a vendor, but definitely as a person, that we're going to continue moving into the serverless direction. And serverless really meaning not just the function as a service, but like the whole broad spectrum of things. And whether that is making sure that we leverage the technologies that make sense, like AWS, the cloud storage things, or the message brokers, the analytical tools that exist in the serverless space. I mean, those are things that we need to adopt, and continuing that. I do think that platforms are going to emerge. And whether we want to call them serverless or not is obviously up for debate. Essentially grab those components together and make something that developers can use, very much to Nelson's point earlier on. So that is what I think is going to happen in the next few years. And ultimately, I hope that, I personally never have to manage the server again. I'd be very happy with that. So the more we do, the less I have to manage. I think that's going to be great. And I do think that as we look at who's using that kind of technology, that the rise of low-code and no-code platforms like Flogo, the parts of TIBCO Cloud integration, that those kinds of things are going to open up even more use cases for even more people to go build functionality.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. We're at time here, so before we wrap up, I want to thank you both for your time, and thank all the audience, the people in the audience, for being here with us today. I have a couple of announcements. The first one is inviting everyone to join us on the next session, which will take place on December 8th. We're going to talk about yet another fascinating topic, federated learning, and we're going to have David Austin from Intel joining us to have that conversation. So hopefully we'll see everybody there. And the second announcement is a hackathon that TIBCO Labs has launched this week. It's a global hackathon based on or focusing on the topics of sustainability. And it's featuring one of the projects that TIBCO Labs has called Project Air that focuses on edge analytics. So, to sign up is very easy. Just go to hackerair.com and search for OSS Day Hackathon, and you'll find the registration page where you're going to find all the information that you need, the guidelines, the instructions, the information on the prices, great prices. We have up to $10,000 for first prize, and there's other prizes in there as well mentioned. So, inviting everybody here in the audience, if you have friends that are developers as well, just make sure they know about it. And we're going to play a little video about the hackathon. So with that, we're going to close today. And thank you so much again, Nelson, Leon. Great seeing you.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Leon. Always a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning, Jesus. Thanks for picking me up in your new car, it looks like. This is one of those really fancy metaverse cars, I think, that I've been reading about.
It is, yeah. It just came out. It's the 2022 model.
Excellent. Well, it's very nice. You've done a good job. I see it's somewhat self-driving as well, which is awesome.
Yes. Kind of interesting, but yes, you can drive on the car, yes. So, tell me, I heard that TIBCO Labs is going to be hosting a hackathon soon?
Yes, yeah, good memory. Absolutely, yeah. We are going to host a hackathon. It's actually the first ever TIBCO Labs hackathon, focused around IoT, the Internet of Things, and sustainability. So we thought it was a great way to focus around problems related to things like climate change, environmental sustainability, a lot of the issues and concerns around that. And we thought it was a great opportunity to apply innovation and technology to some of these problems. So we're really, really excited about it. It'll be, again, the first time that we've done this. And it'll be a great opportunity for people to participate and bring their ideas forward.
And when is it going to start? I heard it's going to start sometime soon, right? In November?
Yes, yeah, that's right. So people can actually go to the Hacker Earth site, which is the site that we're using to run the hackathon. They can go to that site. They can check out the details, the dates, check out all the judging criteria, the rules, the challenges, all those kinds of things will be available on that site. So I would recommend that people just go there, check everything out, and look to see how they participate.
Excellent, perfect. And does it cost anything to register?
No. I mean, unlike, I don't know what this metaverse card cost you, but it's pretty nice. So it's probably a little more than the hackathon. But for the hackathon itself, there's no cost to sign up. It's free of charge. There's no cost for the attendees. And you can join either as an individual or you can actually join as a team. And again, the Hacker Earth site has all the details around what you can do in terms of creating a team and again, how you would register.
Perfect. Yeah. So why don't we display the hackathon site on the screen so then people can register?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it'll show up virtually in your magic metaverse car here somewhere. So hopefully that showed up and hopefully I pointed in the right direction.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, we hope to see everyone there.